Here's the thing. What happens when the goalposts keep moving? What happens when you have a target and that target is so elusive? It's almost as if, what would you say, Dean? It's almost as if, you're here one moment and gone the next, and in here another moment and gone the next. You don't know which way to go, left or right today on the logistics life. Hey, Dean, sorry, man, I cut you off just before that intro, but what do you think? It's like these goalposts keep moving every which way.
It feels like we've been talking about this elusive target for a year, maybe more, where I've been sort of describing truckload capacity trying to reduce to where demand is, but demand keeps slipping further down the road. And it's like now it's disappearing out over the horizon, like we're not even catching up to it. And that's the hardest part with this, is trying to make some sort of sense out of it, because we really don't have any, to use the sporting analogy, we don't have any sidelines. We have no guide rails.
Yeah.
We don't even know where the field is to play.
No, I mean, we have customers. I'm in deep with, obviously the Q2 RFPs that are typically coming out after Q1. Yeah. And I'll tell you, every customer I'm talking to is saying, you know what, then we have to reassess.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the RFPs is typically thousands of orders a year. And I'm speaking with them and they're saying, Dan, I mean, right now we pulled so much stock forward, AKA getting ready for tariffs. Now things are bouncing back and forth. Consumer spend is down. Like, we don't even know how to put projections together at this point. And, we've all, I mean, obviously we're now into Q2, almost at the end of month one of Q2.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Dean, I'm starting to look at projections. I'm starting to look at things and saying, okay, so now we're, 4 months into the year. In my opinion, by month 5, we should be 60% of the way there, in order to maintain that progression throughout the year as a minimum. Typically by the end of the 6th month, I want to be 75 to 80% towards my goals.
Right.
And I'm looking at all of these pieces of the puzzle and I'm saying, okay, Dan, hold on. Yeah. Things are taking longer now. We as logistics professionals, I think, are looking further outside the box than ever. At least I hope people are, well, we are. And you sit back and you start to think to yourself, okay, which freaking goalpost am I actually going for at this point? Like, I was going for this, and is this reality? Is that reality? Like we're coming up to a federal election in Canada now, and it's this pause seems to be happening, and I know every party up in Canada is talking about tariffs, talking about trade. I mean, we've opened up interprovincial borders up here, and Dean, I'm telling you, I had no idea, and call it ignorance, call it whatever you want. Yeah. I had no idea how constricting it was on inter-province trade.
Isn't it nuts? It's like cheese. Like,
I know, like these local breweries. Yeah, like we in Ontario have so many. And don't get me wrong, I live in Ontario, but I'm sure other provinces do as well. But these local breweries were not allowed to sell to any other province.
Yeah.
I went, what? Yeah. Why is a country, and maybe I'm going way too far with it from a political sense, Dean, but I stopped and thought to myself, why as a country are we limiting the people on the front lines? Because as we know, to start a business is very hard. It takes a very unique individual, and it's a lot of work, and 90% of them or 80% of them go out of business, right? So to create a successful business, you got to do things right. And I've had tons of businesses that have failed. And, to say that in my head, it kind of makes me like, am I a loser? But then I stop and think about it. But it's one of these things where you would think, if anything, the government is going to give you the ability to be as successful as possible, because the more successful you are, the more taxes they make.
Right. Well, Dan, it's kind of funny in a way that Canadians weren't thinking as Canada as a country; they were thinking provincially.
Yeah,
right. And that part of it was because since 1994 we've had NAFTA, we've had this free trade agreement where we were highly integrated, between Windsor and Detroit in the automotive business, crossing the soon-to-be finished Gordie Howe Bridge. Like, now what happens to that? Because that was built on Canadian dollars to facilitate free trade, because that's a whole nother story. But this is kind of where you have this massive moment in time where the whole world order gets upset and people find a new way to do things, such as reduce provincial borders, impediments to trading within our own country. We are very good at finding ways around problems. I think that's the thing that logisticians are very, very good at. So I think that's the really good news out of this. I feel, though, that the broader picture is not as good, because intra-Canada is not going to substitute for the loss of revenue or the higher costs of moving back and forward, like not continuing to be a fully integrated supply chain when it comes to automotive. I just don't know how you turn that off quickly. And I think the point of what I wanted to make today was, I feel like the damage has been done, right? So you're talking about Q2, right? So we know that by the time we get into the first week of May, we'll see something like 50,000 fewer containers arriving in the port of Los Angeles. So it's going to drop from 120 to 70 in the next couple of weeks. So that's going to make it about 35% lower year over year. So fast forward and say, okay, even if, as the administration mentioned yesterday, they're talking about reducing tariffs on China, trying to find some sort of an exit ramp to walk this back. Let's say that happens and tariffs go back to where they were. Let's assume that happens. It's going to take another 4 to 5 weeks for ocean carriers and exporters from Asia to turn the tap back on again. So we're now going to see this big lull in May that's going to extend well into June. Next thing, we're into Q3. And where I say the damage has been done, I don't know in the trucking industry many carriers can withstand, particularly in Los Angeles and the West Coast, or dray carriers in Savannah, can withstand, a 30 to 40% drop in volume over a 6 to 8 week period at a time of the year when they really need to be making money. So this is like the perfect storm when you think about, we're at a real tipping point here in the freight industry, because we were just coming out of the freight recession. Bob Costello at ATA mentioned it yesterday. His data showed that even though the volumes dropped in March, they did improve in Q1, and he was very careful to be as positive as he could when he said the freight market was, emphasis on was, improving in Q1. And of course, that was boosted by a lot of cold weather in January in terms of freight rates and demand. So I think we're at a tipping point where if this doesn't get resolved very quickly, we're looking at a situation where freight demand is going to be really bad, I think, for the second quarter. And then it's going to take the rest of the year for us to recover. So what does that mean? Your worst case scenario, your base case, Dan, is things stay the same as they are and we continue struggling along. Your worst case scenario is that we do see an exodus of capacity out of the industry. And that doesn't exclude the brokerage side either, the non-asset side, because I think there's some people that will be struggling also to lift themselves off the bottom.
But absolutely. It depends on the sales rep or the company and where their business is focused, right? When you're talking about Q3, as a salesperson, I immediately think of the slowest quarter for salespeople, for decisions to be made. And the reason I say that is because most people go on vacation. And if you're a logistics manager, VP of logistics, whatever that title is, what will typically happen is if you have a holiday coming up in the next month, you're very unlikely to make a decision before you leave, because then, subconsciously or consciously, whatever it is, we start thinking, it's going to screw up my vacation. I'm going to have to answer my phone. So it's like, what, I'll just keep it as is. And then when you get back, then it's like, so if you look at it, right? So you take the 3 months of Q3, for example, Dean. And you go, okay, if you're having it right in the middle, so 6 weeks in, 6 weeks out, you're right in the middle of Q3. You're most likely not going to make a decision before you go on vacation, just because of what we just spoke about, the whole tailwind of bringing somebody new on, incumbents that know the business, know who to call, know who to speak to. You're going to immediately assume. Now, this is in general, not necessarily for specifics. But then you think about that when you get back. Now you get back, and you've been on vacation many times. When you get back, it's like a flood of trying to catch up. So now you're a week catching up.
Yep.
And then now what you're doing is you're preparing for Q4.
Right.
So now is where it's kind of like most of the summer months, if you will, being from Canada in cold weather to warm, you have a very short window for people to make decisions, and then just expect for decisions to take longer. So I look at I was watching the IQ show, and I'm listening to, the percentage that it's down and what's happening in the ATA and Bob and all these things that you were talking about. And I start saying to myself, I'm going, wow, okay. So how do we as logistics professionals share this information with customers and give them the scoop? We talked about at the beginning about the goalpost moving. Yeah. Right. Like, we've been playing the wickedest game of keep away, as they say in Canada in hockey terms, that I feel we've ever played. The 08-09 crisis, when the bottom fell out, most of it was, there's a direction. We know this is what's happening. And I'd love your opinion on this. Like, to me, what's happening now, the on, off, the pause, now we're going to reduce it. Now we're going to, like, what's happening next? The fact that you were talking about the damage is done, I agree with that. Like, how do we gather data at this point and make decisions based on data?
Dan, this is really, really hard. This is one of the hardest times I've seen in terms of data, because a lot of your data is lagged. Like, so you go from lagged monthly data, sometimes it's 45 days after the event, the government data, such as Jason Miller's truckload ton mile index, which directionally is accurate most of the time. In fact, all the time. And then you go to the high speed transactional data that FreightWaves pushes out through Sonar that gives you a daily pulse of the industry. And that's been really helpful, because you can see volumes falling in response to, more immediate events. But Dan, this is really hard, because you can't look at the data and be definitive and say directionally that's what's happening, because things could change tomorrow. Dan, things are probably going to change this afternoon during an interview in the Oval Office. Yeah. And then we're off to the races again. Just look what's happened to the Dow Jones Industrial Index, like the ups and downs based on a Truth Social post. And I think that's got everybody in a state of paralysis, where the more we get into this, the more people are realizing that this is probably all going to go away within a matter of months, and will have all been for nothing. That's what I feel like we're heading towards. But I think the damage, though, is it's hard to come back from this, because what shippers are doing, Dan, they've got a very good opportunity this year to keep rates very flat. And I think they're winning that battle, because replacement rates as of last week coming into routing guides are only up 0.1%, 0.1. So essentially, carriers are replacing contract rates at the same as what they were last year, just to maintain volume. Yeah. This has been one of the slowest market inflections I've seen in certainly the last decade, because 16-17 it was very pronounced, 18-19 it was a very pronounced turn. Then we had the pandemic, but this one is languishing around 0%, like as in no change in contract rates from last year's bid to this year's bid. Now, that said, there are some lanes that are higher, some are lower, but the net is not much change. And I think shippers are very much aware that the impact of tariffs on their business is probably a net benefit in terms of the rate movement, because there's still excess capacity in the market. And I say that because we had volumes right now, Dan, we are seeing more loads moved in our network than even during the busiest time in the pandemic. And this gets to, we're back to bloated inventories. You were talking about what do we do as logisticians. We are now entering another phase where we have overstocked warehouses that need to move, probably at discounted prices at some point. But a lot of the freight's been moved. So we've now got, Prologis talking about increased warehouse demand in the last couple of weeks. We know that there's been a lot of pull forward of inventory. Apple bought in, 600 tons of iPhones in Q1. there's so many examples of how people have been bringing in inventory, but Dan, not just this year. This has been going on since last September, because remember, this started with the ILA strike that was supposed to happen on October the 1st.
Yep.
People were bringing in, we had the Houthi rebel crisis in the Red Sea, extra 12 days of transit time. So shippers were getting ahead of that, and then realizing that a new administration was coming in and the possibility of another ILA strike on the East Coast as of, what was it, January 15. So you had all these ingredients for people to bring in lots of volume on the overseas front and load up warehouses and intermodal trains and whatever they could put freight into. For the rest of us, though, in the freight market, it means seasonality kind of disappears again. We're back to where we were. You and I talked about this during the pandemic. Seasonality will probably disappear again. A lot of freight has already been moved in the first quarter of this year and the last quarter of last year. And at some point you pay for that. And that's where it's really hard. I don't know how you can be definitive with your customers in an environment where you could be made a fool of this time tomorrow because things changed overnight. We're in, I mean, everybody is in a whole state of flux because no one really knows what's going on. But that's where I still land on this point that I think a lot of damage is irreparable. I feel that Canadians have really backed into their corner, and the whole, not buying American products, that will be sustained to a point. There will be some people that will really dig in. We will see trade lanes shift. We're already seeing a surge in imports from non-China countries, non-tariffed countries. Mm-hmm. So how long does that last? Because China's been very good at, sending their manufacturing points to other countries that won't be tariffed. So we're about to see this whole shift in ocean trade lanes, air cargo trade lanes, and some of that will stick because people will get used to it, and they will say, "This works. This is better." Out of all of this chaos came something better.
Yes,
there will be some of that. How much of it, I don't know. But I think that the damage between Canada and the US is probably the most profound in terms of cross-border freight volumes and the impact it's going to have.
I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's between three countries, Canada, Mexico, and US. I think based on what I've read, right? And maybe I'm missing reports that other people are getting, but I think the relationship between Canada and Mexico has doubled and tripled in strength.
Yep.
Since the relationship between Canada and US has disintegrated, for lack of a better word. You are correct. The inter-Canada proud can be seen everywhere. Mm-hmm. The discussion, if you watched the political debate last week, the last an English and a French one last week, and it's the last big debate before the election next week. Like, I've already voted, polls are already open, they close on Monday next week, on the 28th. And one thing that was very, very clear was the independence, the spend on military, the stop being so reliant on the US, to do things like protect us, to do things like the fact is, regardless of anyone's opinions on the Trump, he speaks facts from a lot of positions, meaning the sense that, the feeling, and as a Canadian, I'll tell you straight up, like our military, I have friends in the military, and we had friends over on the weekend, and this is a very, very interesting story, and we'll get back to logistics in a minute. But this guy was a special forces operator for the Canadian military. Like, he was deployed to Afghanistan for very specific missions, very classified missions. Like, this guy is, the Rambo of Canadian military kind of thing. And we were at a friend's place, and the topic of guns comes up, and he was an avid gun collector. So he started showing this, his name is actually Dan as well, Dan in the military, all his guns. And he literally got emotional. And we're like, what's going on? He goes, do you realize your guns are 100 times better than what they give us as special forces? Right. And I went, not a chance. He goes, yeah. He goes, if you saw the equipment we would go out with, it would blow your mind compared to these guns. So a normal guy that just is an avid gun collector, loves shooting guns, goes to the shooting range all the time, has way better equipment than our Canadian military. So anyone that says that Canada has spent a lot of money on their military doesn't know what they're talking about. You know, I started calling my uncle, and both my uncles were in the military for years. My cousin was in the military, and my uncle was in charge of logistics in the military. And he said, Dan, you would not believe how old our equipment is. And it's facts. So I understand that part of it. And the fact that all the political parties, no matter which one, the one thing we agree on, every party, is that we have to be more self-sufficient. We've relied, okay, and this is, you know, call it bad on Canada. We've relied on the US to be our number one trading partner. It's, you know, like, and take this back to logistics for a second, Dean. Most companies you speak to say, well, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket, right? What if, God forbid, something happens? And trust me, because as a logistics rep, you want the 5-star customers, right? You want over the road, you want international, you want warehousing, you want rail, and you want customs. You want 5-star customers because, for a couple of reasons. Number one is you can integrate your entire offering for the customer and pull one from the other. So if we can reduce 20% on rail, but maybe have 5% on over the road hire, all those numbers meet. So you can pull from 5 different areas of the business. Not to mention, you know, call a spade, and I'll say it on air, it helps secure the customer longer term, right? Because you have more integrated services. So if we look at the integrated services, and then we look at the integration of Canada and US, a lot of companies in Canada, without the US, they don't exist. Like, it's reality. Like, Dean, what's happening up here is unheard of, because companies are going, I have no idea, like, where are my customers coming from?
Right.
What are we doing? You know, I mean, it is incredible. I mean, to the point where Honda plant in Alliston, 4,500 people at that plant, you know, maybe half the population of Alliston work at this plant.
Right.
They're saying if tariffs go, we're moving 60% to the US, because 40% of their business is to the US.
40%.
40% of that Allison plant's business is to the US. So you think if 40% of all of their things they bring in, their tools, their dies, their stamps, their products, all that to build Hondas that are going to the US, so they'll be tariffed on 40% of their materials, then 40% of their finished goods going out. Well, of course it makes sense to move it to the US. Like, as a company, and again, you know, this is where we can go down a wicked rabbit hole and follow the white rabbit, as the Matrix says, into oblivion, Dean. But it's, you know, it's that idea that we've allowed a single entity, whether it be a country, whatever, to be our number one purchaser. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think regardless of the, you know, I'm steadfast and I'm standing my ground, I think China's in the same position. Because I think the US buys more goods from China than any other country, right? Like, if you look at Amazon, Temu, you look at where 90% of these products come from, it's from Asia.
So every other country too, and a lot of other countries. I think we're a massive consumer. There's no question about that.
You know, I watched a video the other day on Asian cars, Japanese cars. And there was a guy that showed this electric car. And I'll send you the video later, but he says, you know, if this car came to America, it would put Tesla out of business in 2 minutes. So the car's going for like 40 grand. But Dean, this car, like, you hold your hand up and you can change screens just by waving your hand. Like, everything's electronic. It's got, you can put I think with 10 gallons of fuel, it's instead of the frunk, like the front trunk, whatever, I think they call it a frunk, there's a little generator in there. If you run out of electricity, you have 10 liters, which can give you an extra 700 miles in range, because it powers a generator that feeds the battery. And just the video screen, what it can do. Like you can play Netflix in the backs for the kids and and the back seats recline, and then the front seats and back seats recline to make like beds.
Oh,
like
wow.
Just the intuitiveness. It's got a little footrest in the back, so you can put your feet up, and you don't have to sit with that position that kind of hurts your back. Like the ergonomics of it, and you're looking at this vehicle, you're going for 40 grand. Like what vehicle can you buy in the US and Canada for 40 grand that has all this tech in it? It self-drives itself,
right?
So it's got like it's and I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, no wonder we're putting these huge tariffs, and not just the US, Canada as well, on Asia. But I sit back and I think, are they better built than ours? Right? Like, I don't know.
But Dan, I think the thing most people miss is that all of the value, the vast majority of the value, is created here in North America from Chinese components, right? So that, you know, that's the part I think everyone misses. It's not the $5 part. It's the $300 we add to it in services and value once it gets here. It's what we turn it into. And that's the part that I think we're damaging the most. Dan, robots aren't giving up their jobs.
No.
Robots are not going to give up their jobs. And that happened 30 years ago. Like that transformation happened. The jobs to bring back manufacturing at the scale that's being proposed takes a long time. So I just, part of me that struggles with this is, where's the strategy? You know, you talk about people speaking facts. I see it a little bit differently, because I don't see any fact-based logical argument that says to the nation, here's our long-term plan, here's why we're doing this. There's none of that.
Okay, yeah, no, so I apologize. I was talking specific with the Canada-US trade difference.
Well, yeah,
just Canada-US.
Yeah, there's spin on it, but then that's where you get the spin, and it kind of misses the point. Like what you can't say is, oh, we're just going to put a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, without articulating what the 10-year plan is, or the 3-year plan, or the 2-year plan. And here's our contingencies. Here's how we're going to retrain people that lose their jobs, right? On both sides. You see what I mean? Like, normally governments talk about, you know, change in a strategic way, and they say, here's what we're going to do, and here's how it helps you. Here you and I are talking about, we don't even know what field we're playing on, let alone find the goalposts and the sidelines. And that is really detrimental to all of us, because we retreat to our respective corners and we stop spending. Like, you know, we're buying frozen pizzas. You know, we're buying cheaper cuts of meat. We're not going out to restaurants. We're putting off that big expenditure. Dan, I've just put off a 30 grand expenditure on a yard redesign because I've got a flooding problem. You know what? I've said, I think I'll wait another year. My niece in Australia has just cancelled a $20,000 trip to the US in September, because guess what? They are being warned in Australia that the CBP will and have been opening up your phones to read your emails and texts and look at your pictures.
Yes.
Now,
do you know, when I went to San Antonio 2 weeks ago for the TIA, when I got back, I had probably 7 people ask me, did they open your phone at customs?
There you go.
No, they didn't even ask me about it. And but it's interesting that you say that, because that was the first question I got asked by probably 7 or 10 people. Oh, did they open your phone? Make sure you clear your phone. Make sure you delete your emails. And I'm like,
Dad, this is part of the reason I've got my Nexus card. It should be turning up at the mail any minute. And I've got absolutely nothing to hide. Like, so I'm probably, you know, I'm a fairly, you know, they've got more information on me being an immigrant in this country than anybody, like, in terms of biometrics. They've got plenty of data. But the problem is, when you start to do that, tourism tanks over the summer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Dean, you can do it to one person, and that one person's going to tell 1 million, 2 million people. And with social media these days, you just said it the greatest. The entire stock market, people lose trillions of dollars. Like, the economy loses trillion over one Truth Social post. Yeah. One post.
But this is where we retreat to our corners and say, wow, like, if we don't know what's coming and we can't plan for it with a reasonable amount of certainty, how does your business function? How does a trucking company function? We start to scramble. you cut back, you pare back, you lay off people, you reduce your expenditure, you spend less, you make more with less. And I can think of a dozen businesses that I know that are doing exactly that right now. And I think that's what's really hard about this second quarter for us is none of us really know what's about to happen. Because even if we get a good signal today, that could be all undone tomorrow. And I think that's Mexico's in a little bit different position, Dan, because they are, I think, more dependent. They've got a much lower labor cost base than, say, Canada does. You've built a very highly integrated supply chain around automotive parts moving back and forward in steel and aluminum. That's a little bit different than what Mexico's built with their massive manufacturing clusters around pharmaceuticals and aeronautics and things like that. It's a little bit different. They've got a free trade zone. You don't, across the border to drag freight. It's a different freight task. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, I feel like even if this goes away, the damage that's going to be done in this quarter we're in and the next quarter will sink a lot of companies. They're not just trucking companies. Then when you are coming out of the worst quarter in the year, like revenue wise, and you normally should be pumping right now, we're starting to see volumes drop. So we've had a flurry of activity in the truckload market. The volume of freight moving is starting to evaporate really quickly, and it's going to evaporate even more so on the West Coast. And in a bizarre way, we're still seeing more loads move compared to this time last year, but rates are dropping. So it tells you there's still more capacity in the market to drive rates down even further. How low can they go? That's the thing. That's the worst case scenario, is that you've got carriers out there still struggling and still trying to get by at a time when things should be improving.
Mm-hmm. And we've, there's I know from a Canadian perspective anyways, the carbon tax that they got rid of, I think has been a huge relief because fuel prices have come way down.
Right.
So there's one thing, right, from a Canadian perspective, because, we've talked about it many times, you and I, where we've talked about, the fact that if fuel gets to a certain point, it becomes more than 25%. And then there's all these variables that probably a lot of people don't understand or even they just look at it and say, okay, fuel's down, let's go. Like lower operating costs make more money, as opposed to lower operating costs can move and have a little bit more runway, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. I know that's helping Canadian carriers. But I can tell you, I've talked about my neighbor many times, works for a Canadian company, does US and Canada, but mostly Canada. He's now sometimes sitting in Quebec for a day waiting for a load, and he's supposed to go inter-company transfers,
right?
But it's just the volumes are dropping. People are shipping less. I have customers that have now an extra 400,000 square feet of warehouse space.
Yeah.
So now they've pulled forward, avoided tariffs, but they're now paying an additional $600,000 a month for, at $2 a square foot or whatever for 300,000 square feet of warehouse space. Right. When you're talking in and out and all that kind of stuff. Yep. And so, it pulls from one because now, you avoid the cost of the tariffs, but now you've just increased that third party rental budget or whatever by tenfold. Right. And where, this goes back to those goalposts again.
Yeah.
Like you're budgeting for Q3, Q4, you're putting sales projections out there. I mean, every company has sales projections, even carriers, even brokers, even every manufacturing company. And as you're putting those projections out there, it's crazy some of the reports you're getting back about what companies are saying about their sales projections, Dean. It's very dreary for a lot of companies that rely on consumer spending, obviously, right? Like at this point in time, I mean, I even have people in HVAC, even to the point where I'm in the middle of building a website for my tattoo artist. And I asked him, okay, so it goes this deep, Dean. I asked him yesterday evening, I said, listen, Shade, have you had any people maybe cancel tattoos because of he goes, it's interesting you asked me. He goes, yeah. We've had people say, you know what, instead of spending this $700 on a tattoo, I'm just going to hold off right now and wait till the end of the summer.
Right.
So even to that point, my neighbor, his son works in HVAC, and he's saying, no, people are canceling HVAC's job. Just like you said, you know, you got a flooding problem. It's a flooding problem in your house, and you're putting it off. Because it's like, do I really need to spend that right now? I mean, we're looking at our backyard, our front yard, these things that we had planned this summer. And I'm like, yeah, I'll probably take on the project myself instead of hiring somebody, because it's a third of the price.
Right.
Do it over a 3-week period instead of a week period, and just call it a day.
Yeah.
You know, or hold off. What is the least amount we need to do now to make it, you know, quote unquote, safe or livable for another year, and just see where the cards fall in a year, kind of thing. Well,
Dan, you know, you look at whether you look at imports or produce season, flatbed volumes. Like when you think about, you know, flatbeds are really interesting snapshot into the industrial economy. The March housing starts that came out last week showed that single family homes were down about 14.2%, like the number of starts. So that's a leading indicator of flatbed demand. So you're starting to see signs that as we head into we're well into Q2 now, you're starting to see signs that the things that lead to more freight on trucks and more, you know, logistics for us in the non-asset side, you're starting to see that volume slide away. Now, even if it comes back, it's going to take time for it to pick back up, because our confidence has been battered as consumers. And you could fast forward and say, by the time we get past the wait and see after the summer, there's going to be some heavily discounted opportunities for consumers, for folks that need to move a lot of this inventory that they've built up. We're back to where we were during the pandemic. I can't remember what year it was, but I think it was 2022, and we started to enter into that destocking phase post the pandemic.
I think it was 2022 when Home Depot came out with Christmas products midsummer. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2022. Yeah.
But then it's like, we've seen this movie before. I didn't want to, but it looks like we're about to see this same movie play out again. But you can't, we don't have the playbook this time. Like we kind of, and we didn't during the pandemic. Like we didn't know what we didn't know then. We didn't know what was coming. We were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. This is a little bit different because the demand triggers are very different. Like we have complete uncertainty about what's coming down the road. And I think that has caused people to retreat even more so than they would normally, to try and protect themselves. You add on top of that the impact that AI is having on a lot of jobs, a lot of industries, a lot of professions. I think that's probably a bigger story that people aren't talking about. Whole industries that disappear. People that write copy, graphic designers, people that use their smarts to create services. I'm amazed that ChatGPT or other products like that can do something that would take a highly skilled professional with years of experience, maybe a week to do in a consulting engagement. It's doing it in a matter of seconds. I'm like, so where do all the people go? It's a bit like, is this why large trucking companies are investing in autonomous trucks? Because they realize that we're going to need automation, and we're going to have fewer people that want to work and can work. I don't know that I'll see that in my lifetime, but there's some stuff.
I think you will, Dean. I think the next 5 years, like if you look at the advancement, right? Like in AI specifically, I'm a huge tech geek, you know that.
No kidding.
AI specifically has probably come 300-400% in the last year. And it's like, if you watch the industry of AI, the amount of new AI agents, like the deep seeks of the world and the Manuses of the world, these, like ChatGPT was kind of the first one to hit the market, if you will. That's why most people talk about ChatGPT. But if you look at like a company like DeepSeek or Manus AI, way more powerful, like incredibly way more powerful. Things like N8N using autonomous agent, MCP servers that are now going to be like all of these different tools. And it might sound like just hieroglyphics to somebody, but the reality is all of these tools are coming out at such a fast pace. Like every night, I sit in bed for an hour and a half and I catch up on the new tools. And Dean, I'm at the point now where, and I won't watch a video past 20 minutes. Like I won't watch a video longer than 20 minutes unless it's a fully education, like make.com, which is my automation platform that I choose to use. They came out with AI agents. They came out with MCPs. And so now I'll do an hour or 2 hour video on that specific tool to really ingrain it. It's like when I did it with Notion, right? But what's able to happen now in the last year, call it, is a million times more powerful. Like if you look at the AI video generation, the tools like Runway, the image generation tools and all of that, the tools that create presentations for you based on a simple prompt, like all of these tools have come about in a very short period of time. One thing that I'm finding I'm doing more is I will go to a professional and I will get something written in a very structured format that releases like dopamine or has some neuro-linguistic programming, some real neurological processes to it. But once I have that now becomes the template, Dean. And you can upload that to a GPT. You can upload that to an MCP. You can upload that to pretty much any AI tool and say, analyze this. Every time I ask you A, produce B in this format. You're done. So you pay for it once and you can replicate it over and over, right? That in the next year, this is going to be a joke compared to what's possible in the next year. And then the next year, like I would say even in 6 months, what we do today with AI will almost be comedic in 6 months as to what we can do. Now, there's one part about AI that a lot of people get very scared about is there is always going to need to be human interaction at a certain point. Meaning we are not at the point with AI where, in my opinion anyways, some people will disagree with me, where it could do all your sales for you and there's no human until such point as you close the sale. Non-existent, because the experience, Pinnacle says one, biggest thing is experience matters, and it really does. Our experience in, analyzing this versus this, and then, my context from the last 30 years of my career tells me this. AI will never have that because it just has context based on what it reads. Now, thinking models are getting better and they are able to reason, like AI agents reason. So I'll give you a perfect example. I set up an AI agent where on my cell phone, I have the fast action button. And so that fast action button is a voice memo. So I can click it and I can talk to my phone and say, can you email Dean and schedule a meeting with Dean Crook on XYZ on this date at this time? And I just do it. And what it does is that voice gets transcribed, sent to my agent. My agent's connected to my calendar. You'll get a meeting invite from me about XYZ at this time for a Teams meeting or for a Google meeting, and it'll go. So it's making my velocity of what I'm able to do higher.
Wow.
Right? We were at the TIA, there was a gentleman there promoting a service, which is a voice AI agent that people call, and it will negotiate freight rates for you, and it'll call you if it needs variables and all this. And as much as my immediate geek in me is like, oh my God, that is so cool. I want that for the team. Negotiating rates, talking with suppliers, is how you build your business. Right. I'm not leaving that to AI, because as a carrier, I call a company and I mean, come on, we're at a point where it's an AI, right? Right. How do you feel? You're like, what? You can't even answer the phone anymore and negotiate rates with me? Like, to me anyways, this is just, in my own opinion, like in business, it's humans. And there's one thing that I can say, Dean, and then I'll shut up for a little bit and let you finish up. The fact that when I went to the TIA 2 weeks ago, it really reinvigorated that human piece of the business puzzle. Right. And I think this has separated the human piece of the puzzle. meaning being on teams and not needing to be in the same room. Like, really, call it a spade. You don't need to be in the same room. But being at that event, meeting people, speaking face to face, having 2-3 people in like kind of a mini mastermind circle when you're asking questions, and then this person bringing up questions, and then like it was amazing. And I really hope in business that doesn't go away, because that, I really think, is the piece of the puzzle that brings us all to the collective table, if you will. And AI will never be able to do that, because it's not a human. Call it a spade. There'll never be a human 2.0. We're a human 1.0. Like, humans are who we are. Now we can create 2.0 systems, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 systems, and they will. They will. Autonomous driving will be here before you know it. In order to meet the masses, though, it will have to be in that 90 percentile, because you got to remember, if it's all computers talking to each other, the algorithm can work out. You throw a human into the mix that says, no, I'm going to go first because I want to go. And then everything comes to a grinding halt at an intersection, right?
Dan, I was just thinking, 40 years ago, I remember someone saying to me, there's this thing called email coming, where people are going to send, and this was just after people said you'll be able to walk up to a brick wall and put your plastic card in it and get money out. And I'm thinking, wow, in 40 years, look how much progress we've made. But the thing is, it's exponential. The change is exponential. Give you an example. This morning, I was doing some research on DAT's 47th year in business, and going back to load boards in the 80s, early 80s and 90s. And when a load would pop up on the load board, it'd make this ding-da-ding noise, and everyone would rush to the screen to write down the phone number.
You're talking about at the truck stops.
The truck stops. The load board monitor. Yeah. And so I was researching it, and I was trying to find out, how did Mo Jubitz at the Jubitz truck stop figure out that he needed to build a load board at the fuel pumps, because truckers were running in and out pulling loads off a notice board in his gas station at the truck stop. And I thought, what was the drug? Because that was pre-deregulation. So what was it? And the part I missed was carriers would get a trip lease to backhaul, because back then the ICC regulated all of the routes and the pricing. But if you could get a trip lease to get a backhaul out of the Pacific Northwest for another carrier, and you'd go to a hotel or somewhere and get a one-time trip lease for a load. It's called trip leasing. And that went away once deregulation came in. Anyway, so I'm researching all this at 5 a.m. this morning, and I typed this into Perplexity, which I've been using. It's another engine. It's awesome. At the end of it, Dan, it said, if you're posting this for your followers, could we break it into slides for you? And it wrote this whole script with slides, captions for Instagram. Now, I hadn't asked it to do that, but somehow it figured out that I might be thinking about doing something on social media, because I did something yesterday. So somewhere in the background, there's this, I picture all of these little, hamsters on a treadmill running madly, doing all this data work. Of course, that's not what's happening, but where is all of this happening? And when you and I've talked about truckload carriers moving all of these data centers that have been growing like weeds all around the country. Well, that's part of it. Somehow they're all connected. I don't understand the technology, but somehow we've now built this massive engine that's almost invisible, that's creating all of this value for us. And I think that's the key. We've got to figure out how to turn that into value as opposed to resist it, because that's the inclination, is to push back and say, no, this is too scary. I think it's probably the opposite.